Hello, Jeando.
Hi, Kevin.
In conscious guidance and control work, one of the main things we have to learn is to how to do experiments on ourselves, by ourselves. So, can you talk a little bit about how the importance of the experimental method in this work and uh, why it's important, and then also how we go about doing it, and how did F.M. Alexander understand experiments in relation to experiences and that sort of thing?
Yes, I think it's a very good topic, and you started precisely with the dichotomy, the difference between the experiments that we can make and from which we can learn, and also on the other hand, what we call experiences. It's it's something that didn't strike me at first because I was a reader of Alexander. I read Alexander's books for many years before having any lesson. So it was quite a surprise when I had my first lesson, and I didn't expect the lesson to go this way at all. I really wanted. Well, it was a time when I had decided I wanted to train in the Alexander technique because I'd read the books for so long. And so I was really interested in the experimental side. And you will find that this was also because I was interested in constructivism. Well, people like Vygotsky and Dewey, John Dewey, was a big help for me to understand a bit more about the Alexander technique without having any lesson. uh, Obviously, I was in the wrong, and it was a very interesting situation because when I had my first lesson, I really wanted to discuss some aspects of the books that I read with all the references to Dewey and other people. And my first teacher was newly qualified, coming from England, and she refused to answer my questions about the books. Well, first of all, because she didn't really knew the books that well, and second, because she thought that she was there to give me an experience. And I was completely taken by surprise. I really thought we were going to discuss experiments, testing, and control conditions, all these words that I had in mind because of my training, but also because I read Alexander. And Alexander, when he explains his experiments in the use of the self, is clearly testing theories. So I think that nowadays, of course, the experience side has won the game, and we are very few of us that will develop the initial Alexander technique unless the tide turns. So to start this discussion, I want to go to the theoretical side, and I want to show what influenced me to start with. And it's, of course, these introductions by John Dewey. And Dewey is talking about change, of course, as he's experienced it, and because of the lesson he had with Alexander. And he says, any sound plan must prove its soundness in reference both to concrete consequences and to general principles. We too often forget that these principles and facts must not be judged separately, but in connection with each other. Further, any theory or principle must ultimately be judged by its consequence in operation, whilst it must be verified experimentally by observation of how it works. Yet, in order to justify a claim to be scientific, it must provide a method for making evident and observable what the consequence or consequences are. And this method must be such as to afford a guarantee that the observed consequence actually flow from the principle. And I unhesitantly assert that when judged by this standard, that is, of a principle at work in effecting definite and verifiable consequences, Mr. Alexander's teaching is scientific in the strictest sense of the word. It meets both of these requirements. In other words, the plan of Mr. Alexander satisfies the most exacting demands of the scientific method. And of course, when you go and have your first lesson imbued with these ideas of making evident and observable what the consequences are, you start to observe your teacher from the side. You start to, assess the connection that there is between the speech. So speech is simply theory. When you talk about something, when you talk about, for example, lengthening and widening the back, this is speech. So you're saying something. So in Alexander or Dewey's reasoning, we are discussing theory. And then there is the practice. So the teacher has orders that are necessary for the elongation of the spine. This is how Alexander presents it. And so you look at your teacher and suddenly it's quite strange because I showed last week how Alexander was defining lengthening the spine in practice. And when I started to look at the teachers when performing their procedures of change to the pupil, I saw difficulty in their capacity to, in fact, affect their own use in the same way. In lifting the hands, you start to observe what the consequences are of the theory. And then it becomes complicated. You think, wow, it's strange because it appears that the modern Alexander teacher, of course, provides theory and conceptions and ideas, and you compare the ideas that when a person is saying that sensory re-education will give you a correct criterion to direct your own actions, then suddenly the theory and the practice clash together. It's difficult because the principles and the facts do not match. The consequences are so. Of course, it will be objected that this is just a moment in time, and it's possible that, if you take it along an hour, for example, for the 58 minutes, the teacher is going to use the back well, and then for just the moment of the photograph, the person is going to pull down, and that is inconsequential because, of course, it's time that is of the essence. It's how long you use the self. If you use yourself badly for 2 seconds and the rest of the day is fine, that's great. Well, of course, I admit this, but there are troubles because you start to watch that, of course, in raising the hands, the person does not, really consciously guide the trajectory of the elbow and the trajectory of the shoulder. As a result, each time that the person is lifting the hand in the air, you will see the shoulders raising in the air. Well, you know that the muscles of the shoulders are the main part of the neck muscles, and so the neck cannot be free when the person is doing this. And then when you start to see that in standing and bending, leaning forward, the person is really protruding the abdomen, then you start to think that there is a real difference between experiments and experience. And so we are going to start with the definition. I need to introduce how I think about these ideas. And the first program is to have words to define the words we are using when communicating. So I've taken a definition for experience. So experience is the process of seeing and learning from a complex event witnessed or felt by someone, especially leading to a change in mental state or knowledge. So you can have an experience that is not creating any impact on your life, but this is not going to be the one we are looking for. In, of course, the Alexander Technique lesson in the somatic teaching, the teacher is going to impress how nice it could be to use yourself differently, and this is going to make an impression. And we are discussing a change in mental state. You're going to feel how nice it is. You're going to, well, certainly develop the idea that it would be good to learn this technique. Now, when we talk about experiments, we have a completely different set of mind. Experiment or experimental practice is a scientific test. It's much closer to what John Dewey is explaining, that he really experimented with the teaching of F.M. Alexander, which is a completely different thing. He was not so much interested in this process of experiencing something, of being manipulated into such a state that, wow, you feel totally different. No. He wanted to have a clear idea between the words, the hypothesis. So there is an hypothesis that is starting the experiment. The experience starts with being in the flow, being manipulated in a certain way. Well, with a scientific test, you have to exercise the conscious mind. It's not the feeling mind. It's different. So there is an hypothesis. And there must be a term that I use sometimes, and I've been asked by Kevin to define control conditions. And these control conditions, allied with the test, is going to bring some gain in a new knowledge. There are two kinds of new knowledge. You can suddenly reason out through the experiment in control conditions that some hypotheses are incorrect, ungrounded, yes, badly reasoned. And you are going also to get positive knowledge, which is less important, but exists also, is that some new hypothesis may be correctly grounded and lead to observable fact. What is important in the difference between experience and experiment is the question of transmittable knowledge. When you have an experience, of course you may be confronted with something strange, with something big, with something really emotionally lifting. But if you want to transmit, you can transmit your impression. You can try and make someone else to feel the color red if you are not blind. But if the person is blind, if the person has never had such an experience, the person will never understand your words, and there will be no bridge possible unless the person experienced the event. And for some, unforeseeable conditions, feel the same thing that you did feel. There have been many students having lessons with F.M. Alexander, and it appears that they didn't feel exactly the same thing. So their interpretation through their experience was very different from one to the other. So what experiments are, they are a procedure, and this procedure has been developed not by Alexander in any means. It has been developed much earlier by the Greek and other people, and it's how to transmit knowledge, how to make certain that people with completely different backgrounds, completely different maybe language, can suddenly start to produce knowledge that they can share. And in our case, we are very interested in making sure that the speech we are using and the actions we are producing are observable and transmittable and, of course, assessed. And so that's the idea. When we do experience something, words are impossible to translate, so it's very difficult to transmit that the kind of knowledge that we have. So there is this idea that there is a somatic knowledge, there is what people felt deeply is part of their capacity to react or incapacity to react to different things. We all know about for example, different syndromes where people have really badly impacted by experiences, and these experiences make it now difficult for them to adapt to new conditions. This is, of course, unfortunate, and it's necessary then to understand that experience is not such a fantastic thing, a good thing. You want people to experience kindness. You want people to experience all sorts of quality that you have in mind, that you have experienced, and that have led you to a certain capacity to adapt. But in different conditions, it can be totally alien to other people. I remember working with children with epilepsy and autism, and for them the kind of kindness that was obvious to us, valid people, was absolutely threatening to them. So you need to understand sometimes that it's necessary to go beyond this thinking kindness, thinking niceties, yes, and start to really understand beyond our direct experience, direct emotions. So when I gave the 2015 introduction to the ATI conference, there were many teachers, and there was one from Switzerland. And after the talk, that was for 3.5 hours, I think, or something like that, she came to me and very excited. She said, "I think you're a virus." And it was, I took it as a compliment, because transmittable knowledge is the idea. Infectious knowledge. How do you transmit a conception to someone? Is something that, of course, is the center of my work as a teacher, and this is where everything rotates. We want people to be capable of experimenting by themselves, not experiencing something because somebody has the power with their hands to make them experience something fantastic. Experiencing something fantastic is not going to lead to transmittable knowledge. And the first person you need to transmit knowledge to, curiously, is oneself. Because we are dealing with habits. And so when you deal with habits, of course, you know that your tendency to reproduce some unwanted actions is going to be there tomorrow. It's not going to disappear because you had a tremendous experience. It's going to be there. So if you believe that the experience you're going to get with the teacher is going to bring you peace, bring you calm, and you must also remember why you came and had a lesson. And you had a lesson because you felt it was interesting to have a lesson, to in fact explore something different from your habits. And your habit is, well, when it comes to the organization of the physical behavior, is to rely on somatics, is to rely on your internal feelings, internal appreciation of your sensations. And so you are governed by experience, and you will be governed by experience tomorrow. And the little extraordinary time you had with a touch teacher is not going to amount to much yet tomorrow, because then you will have to deal with your experience, and you cannot deal with your experience any different tomorrow because you had a fantastic day today. The two do not work together. So this is interesting. And when I started this technique, I came with this knowledge, this text. So Alexander is saying during the lesson, I make them endeavor to exercise their conscious mind all the while. As I already said, I maintain further, and I'm prepared to prove that the majority of physical defects have come about by the action of the patient's own will operating under the influence of erroneous preconceived ideas and consequent delusions, exercised consciously or more often subconsciously. And these conditions can be changed by the same will directed by right conception implanted by the teacher. So we have this idea of exercising the conscious mind, and you must understand what it means. It's very practical. It's that Alexander sees us as two people with two minds. We have the primitive mind of sense, how we feel, what we feel, thinking about feeling, talking about feeling, and the conscious mind is different. The conscious mind is based mostly on reasoning, that is, using tools that are intellectual in a sense, like logic, like reasoning-based arguments, where we argument with ourselves first, or we can argument also with other people. And so this is what he calls the conscious mind. And so the majority of physical defects come about by the action of the patient's own will. So this own will is operating under the influence of experiences, past experiences. So when you have an experience, it's not a pure feeling. It's not, some teachers say, then you are in the flux. I don't imagine the flux exists really. My mind doesn't work like that. I'm more or less appreciating and judging and creating some theories about what is happening, or approving some theories about what is happening. So I am always forming ideas associated with the experiences I have. I have an experience of a knee that is itching, for example, and I imagine immediately a theory that I've been bitten by a fly or anything. But there it's very, very seldom that you will experience a feeling and stay in pure state of flux where you don't have any ideas going to that feeling. So you get experiences associated with ideas, and these ideas for Alexander's are not tested. They are preconceived idea. There's something that comes to you, you never knew. You believed that in order to bend the knees, you had to do something special with the ankle, for example, or you were seen doing something with the ankle. So then we enter delusions that very often you will hear, I know my body, I know what it is I feel, and as a result, in a certain way, I am quite sure of my actions, and I think that I control my action. Subconscious control is not a lack of control. Subconscious control is really something like too much control. People think that they are controlling their the movements of the different parts of their organism when they sit, or when, for example, they go to stand, or when they walk. We need very often to make an experiment, that is to film the person under conditions where the person is going to be able later on, when consciously controlling, which is looking at the video, very often being helped by somebody that can narrate what is seen. That is, very often you will see a video of yourself or another person, and yes, I'm walking, or I am sitting, and what? It's often necessary to break that general impression and to narrate exactly the trajectory of different spots and compare them together, to make apparent the delusion of control. The delusion of control is too much control, too much belief in the capacity of controlling by feeling. And this is not only applicable to pupils or students, it's applicable to all of us, and teachers. And somatic teachers are not immune. Somatic teachers believe they feel what they are doing, and when they are seen performing horrendous misuse or maladjustment of the mechanism of the torso, they consider they are not doing anything bad. They consider that it's okay. They don't see any need to change the conditions they are creating by directing your action with the conception that their feeling has been re-educated, and that now, well, they are more or less safe. They are more or less, no, they are not safe. They are on the right. They are feeling right. And as long as they are feeling right, as they react kindly, everything is fine. Well, the first preconceived idea for Alexander is this idea that we can drive ourselves, drive our physical behavior using our feeling, re-educated or not. I am still wanting to find some teacher that has been re-educated, or the sensory appreciation has been re-educated, and could perform, for example, a sit-to-stand under conditions, which we call control. Which means that we know exactly where the feet are when the person is going to start, where the knees are, and we can assert a certain number of parameters. We want to have a geometrical reference in front of the person, like a simple wall, and so we can then film the action and see whether the person is performing the different movements of the different parts of the torso and the movements of the limbs in the way, defined by F.M. Alexander. Well, yes, because in the books, I'm coming back to this, in the books we have many indications where it's suddenly possible to understand what we mean by implanting the right conception in the mind of the person. if you implant the right conception in a person that has a delusion of control, it's quite interesting to understand how it works. That is, that you cannot start from the experience. You have to get out of the experience of the person. And how do you get out of your own experience? Well, in scientific tests, it's very simple. You form a theory. So when we watch things happening, there is an event. It's quite a complex event. There is two persons interacting together. It's at a certain time in history. It's at the end of the life of F.M. Alexander, and we see that he's performing something. How do you form a theory out of that? Well, first of all, you don't try and form the theory totally by yourself. This is what is fantastic about science or about culture, is that, of course, Alexander wrote books. So you will find that this is performed in 1950, and 40 years later, in 1910, as I explained in the last video, Alexander explains what he means by the means of obtaining a position of mechanical advantage. And what you discover is that what he is performing is exactly the means of performing a position of mechanical advantage. So suddenly you have an experience and you see a little film, but the conception you're going to form is different, is in the sense of the action that is going on is now associated with the theory that came 40 years earlier. Ah, yes, you think, okay, is in fact having that person create some antagonistic action, antagonistic pull. There are words that are coming to your help, because suddenly it's not just pictures where you see people leaning back with a very strange shape. No, there are things going on here. And it's the connection you can form between speech, between the theory, and of course the action that is going to inform your decisions. That is the difference between experience and test. Well, is that when you experience something, you are immersed into the experience. Of course, you paid for your lesson and you came to have a touch lesson, so you're lying down and fine. But your will, your decisions, but will is just a term to say that you have a capacity, a directive aspect that can help yourself make decisions. So your decisions in experience are passive, while your decisions in experiments are focused on testing a theory. So there is this a two-way work where there is a practice on one side, but then I had to look everywhere to try and find some clues as to what is the theory behind the physical adjustment Alexander is making. It sounds very strange, because what need of a theory you have if you have a perfect touch teacher that is able to explain to you what is meant by lengthening the back. The difficulty is that I had no one to explain what is lengthening the back, and I discovered that lengthening the back for Alexander and lengthening the back for his successors was something completely different. So, fine, let's open the box. And so inside the box, there are other elements. For example, there are some ideas. This is a report by Irene Tosker that was present during the Bedford Physical Training College lecture. That happened in 1934, so it was not the young Alexander anymore. It was after the first training course, and Alexander is having the young student of the Swedish gymnastics college, having them on a platform and performing for an audience. And so after working for 10 minutes with a young lady, he said, well, what this young lady is doing now is a very difficult thing to do. She is directing her head forward and up from here. And Alexander indicates with his hands a part of her back. I'm not going to develop on the rest because I was really stuck there. I really started to think, okay, Alexander is saying that, and Miss Tasker knows something that I don't, because after a 3-year training course, I had no clue, no idea. Well, my conception about directing the head forward and up were totally different. The Carrington School is where I train. I discovered was in fact following a theory developed by Patrick MacDonald, where the head forward and up is the head forward and up relatively to the neck. So the neck is going back and the head forward, and the extension, the slight extension that is nearly impossible to see, is going to organize the rest, if you want, of the organism. Well, here, suddenly you have a very different conception. So the first thing was to think, okay, from where? Because I was not present, this is just text, you don't know what it means to direct the head forward and up from here. What could it be? So then you do your work and you start and you think, okay, when he's motivating the movement of the young man to obtain the position, the means of obtaining the position of mechanical advantage, you discover that yes, he's got his left, it's his right hand because the photo is turned, but he's really doing something with the upper thoracic spine. He's always trying during that lesson, and doing the lesson with Margaret Goldie, is always in fact using his hand at a certain place here on the torso. So the little finger is here and all the fingers are performing a curving movement. Is repeating it 7 or 6, 8 times, so it's not difficult to check what I'm saying. So you go and look at the film where Alexander is performing his 2 lessons, and you find that yes, he's really directing the head forwards from somewhere. And suddenly I realized that words are treacherous in a way. Because yes, the end result is that the head is forward and up from here. But in fact, in terms of experimental data, for me, this meant that the upper thoracic spine was moved relatively to the lower thoracic spine. It's absolutely obvious that the organization of the upper torso is just one part of the deal, and there is another one, which is that the lower torso and middle torso are working conjointly in opposition with the upper thoracic spine. And it's only when the upper thoracic spine can go forward and up that the neck can go forward and up relatively to the back. So what I'm explaining is that I started, what I've always done, which is to form theories. I looked at this image, I compared with the text evidence, and I started to think, wow, he's not doing this by chance. You cannot do something by chance if you do it on yourself and do it on other people. And so there is reason, and as this is part of the position of the mechanical advantage, when you incline the torso in the other direction, it's still part of the position of mechanical advantage idea. So then you get to a very simple theory where you think, okay, he's using the weight of the upper torso relatively to a fulcrum to create a load. Once again, we go back to this idea of position of mechanical advantage, where you use the cantilever of an important weight in order to stretch a passive spring. So I started to imagine, yes, antagonistic pulls. He was saying that this is the only way you can get your antagonistic pulls. Well, that's a theory. You think, okay, it's so when you have the theory, then you observe other events. Then it's not an experience. It's more or less a mind experiment. When you look at Marjorie Barlow and you think, okay, she's not using a position of mechanical advantage to bring her hands forward. She is in fact collapsing the lower back, and she's arching the top so that her sternum is not at all parallel to the line of the back, but is unduly lifted at the front. So you think, wow, this is interesting, because this is a figure in the somatic Alexander technique, and suddenly you think, wow, she's not directing, or she does not understand the theory, or she has a different theory than FM Alexander. So you start to think, well, Marjorie Barlow was really a pillar of the somatic technique, which said that through experience you can transmit valuable knowledge. Well, for me, this was like a blow. I was part of a group of people where Marjorie Barlow was ranking very high in the world of the Alexander technique. It was like suddenly a big disappointment, and it was difficult because it was impossible to talk with other teachers about it without suddenly witnessing an eruption of emotions, of negative emotions, to someone that could speak in this way. Yes, I just wanted to discuss the theory and the practice, and seeing where experiments could lead us to explore a bit more, where everybody wanted to have the experience. So I just followed my route, and I came to the notion that it was necessary, when I was witnessing actions, looking at a film, it was necessary to start to reason out a possible theory. And when you reason out a possible theory, you suddenly discover what I mean by controlled conditions. Because when you look at a person leaning back, it happens so fast, it's so fluid. I can tell you it's very, very difficult to get any sort of conditions that could be controllable. It's something that happens in front of your eyes, and you say, wow, these people are doing things that's really amazing. But you can't do anything about saying that something is amazing. Yeah. So there are now another step that is absolutely fundamental to understand experiments and to understand the initial Alexander technique as I teach it, is that you must use tools. You cannot just go and try and experiment something. You cannot. So tools are, of course, tools of representations. You need a representation. And by representation, it's not an image. No. At first, it's words. So the first word you must have is movements. You must understand that, for example, when you take a simple instruction to lengthen and widen the back, you have a complex mechanism in front of you. So, with this complex mechanism, It's absolutely obvious when you look at other pictures where people are not performing in the same way. Let's say, yeah, I took videos of myself and I could see that I was not at all leaning back with this kind of organization of the movements of the different parts. So very quickly, I had this idea that there were movements of different parts. Well, it was not that difficult because that was indicated in the books where Alexander had explained his theory. It was a little bit hidden, but if you start to make a search in the books and you just type the word movement in the first 3 books and look how many hits you get, you will be surprised. So that's what I did, and I started to think, okay, movements, but there are movements that must be controllable. Controllable means measurable. It has to be measurable. And as muscles and fascia, soft tissues change tremendously during movements, it's uncontrollable. You cannot control a muscle. You cannot establish what has been the change from the position A to position B with a muscle, because a muscle is 3D, and when it changes, the changes are too complex for human minds to understand. Even scientists using fantastic systems of 3D representation are well, very clearly indicating that they are talking probabilities. They are describing the movement of the muscle as a possible. They are not able to really, in fact, model a movement of a muscle. But there are bones. There are bony parts. Bony parts do not change during a movement. And you can very simply find specific landmarks on the anatomical structure. So you know that when the person is going to lean back, well, the position of the upper torso and the position of the upper sternum and lower sternum are going to be more or less valid representation of the movement that you have in view. You will see if a person, well, Alexander said, never override the movement of the body with the movement of the head in leaning back. Well, that's very simple. You can very clearly assess whether the person has overridden the movement of the body with the movement of the head, as the head has a bony part that is really easily checked. And same thing with different spots on the torso. So we have the upper sternum, the lower sternum, we have thoracic 7, the vertebrae, the thoracic vertebrae number 7, and other spots that I explain as valid condition that can be tested. The trajectory can be filmed, the starting position, the end position, the different speeds of different spots on video can be very easily assessed, as speed is the amount of space that is covered in the same amount of time. Well, with a video, it's very simple to measure the speed, and we are really checking gross movement, the movement of the upper torso, middle torso, lower torso, the movement of the shoulders. When you lean back, it's very easy to assess whether the shoulders have been moved up or down, whether they have gone faster or not relatively to the upper torso. And so we come to a possibility to teach someone how to experiment. Not practicing experiment on pupils. It's not the point. The point is for the person to discover self-experiment. If you want to define the initial Alexander technique very simply, it's self-experiment. It's learning to self-experiment. Establishing control conditions, yes, and then measuring after theory has been developed. So the theory is that it's possible to, in fact, use conceptions that are not derived from experience, conceptions that are discussed with the initial Alexander technique teacher, and say it's possible to, in fact, monitor how much speed you transmit to the middle and upper torso. And so the person can readily experiment and in the same amount of time verify how much movement there has been, how much quantity of movement on different parts. And so the person will start discovering something that is totally new. It's directing oneself not from experience, but directing oneself from reasoned out ideas, reasoned plan, and from, of course, analysis. So this leads to a new understanding of two very important definitions. Because most people, they judge their physical activity by sensory appreciation. They appreciate their experience. And by appreciating their experience, they, in fact, they form a narration. They have a speech that says, I have a pain in my left knee or right ankle, I have tense shoulders, I have a scoliosis. And so there is many people today that do not look at dictionaries for definitions. They have a very immediate, spontaneous, if you want, appreciation on words. They say that judging is, you should not judge. You should never judge the pupil, for example. Well, this is quite funny because that's a complete opposite theory regarding appreciation and judgment in Alexander's work. In Alexander's works, appreciation is not the good guy. And judgment is. I'm going to try to explain how this can be. So, very simply, first, the dictionary says that appreciation is the ability to realize and understand how enjoyable, useful something can be. And there is in this the acknowledgement. Well, it's not a reasoning, really. It's a feeling of the importance or the role or value of something. That's what we call appreciation. Appreciate your time. Appreciate a cake. You appreciate the itch behind your knee. That's an appreciation. Now, judgment is a completely different setting, really. The definition of the dictionary is the ability to make measured and informed decisions after careful consideration. An opinion formed about someone's action or something after careful consideration. So, to make a judgment, it's not only sufficient to see the actions of a person. You have to, in fact, relate these actions with certain principles, certain rules. It's not something that comes from your heart, if you want. When I look at a person going to stand, for example, there is very little empathy, if you want. There is no need for empathy, and even empathy in these conditions can be really inappropriate. Because we really want to relate the different movements we see with principles. Yes, with the principles of mechanical advantage, the principles of antagonistic action. Is the person really using the stretch of the fabric in order to create a spring system that is going to power movement, or is the person not knowing how to use these fantastic organization and conditions? And so the point is not to bring disrepute into the person, you may be considered an enemy if you start looking at how people go to sit and stand. That's Alexander saying this, and it's absolutely true even nowadays, even in the Alexander technique world. Alexander teachers are not used to, well, being scrutinized. But it's not scrutinizing to bring blame. It's absolutely not. Judgment is to inform decisions. That as to do we want to continue to perform the same actions or to be seen performing the same actions, because very often the person is not aware that he's doing this type of contortions when placing his hands on other people and or when just going to sit. No, it's again this question of transmittable knowledge. It's about sharing with the pupil how these representation can be useful. It can be very useful for a person to discover that despite all the somatic teaching that he's received, that in fact his control over his actions, which exist, which is much too much, leads to, in fact, unwanted actions and to improper use of the self. So, judgment is something the pupil should expect, should demand from the teacher. It's not, oh, you're pulling down, because that's an appreciation. You're pulling down cannot, it's not measured. The decisions are not informed. Informed decision means that you can, in fact, observe the whole action and start to decompose the action to show how the different parts interacted with each other to, in fact, present the result that is seen. That's very important to understand that in the initial Alexander technique there is one word that is very important. So you decide the order necessary for the elongation of the spines. Well, this is not just fine, lengthen the spine, or the freedom of the neck, go on, free the neck. No, you must be capable of judgment. And as here, it's measured and informed decisions in the sense that the pupil must understand how he pulls down, what are the different movements that are connected together and which result in what is seen. If you just say to a person, you're pulling down, or it could be better, what do you think the person can do with that? Nothing. So, when we want to achieve a particular end, we want to eradicate some defects, we want to develop potentialities. Let's say that's the game of the teacher. Well, of course, it's a question of means. And Alexander very early defined a word that he called procedures. And I've lost my screen, sorry. That's it. Procedures. Yes, it's very important to come back to the center. And the center is when I work with pupils, I want the pupil to understand judgment and to understand what we mean by decisions and control decisions. Conditions which help us to know when our decision has brought the effect, the result that we want, and when it has failed. It's very important to know when it has failed. Sometimes it has failed because we didn't understand really what the decision was about. That's a possibility. The second is that, yes, we understood the decision, but we've been incapable of translating it in practice. In that case, it's quite interesting. And in that case, it's necessary to investigate to see if there is not another movement that is seen produced that makes it impossible to in fact implement the decision to move the part that we wanted to move in the first place. So we are in fact working with procedures, and I have produced a definition of procedures because it's so central to how a session of initial Alexander technique is going, to understand in what scheme decisions are made. So I will finish with this for today. I will come back to all this question of judgment, this question of course, how to transform speech into action in another episode. For the moment, a series of action, that's the definition of procedure, a series of action conducted in a certain order and in a certain manner. Each of these actions is not the outcome of an individual process with the sum of these actions somehow producing skill. Rather, each action is already the product of a number of strategic processes used in interaction. Each of the actions of the procedure is a tangible form and part of a strategy. The modular decomposition of the procedure in a series of actions will in time enable the student to create his own strategies of self-regulation to address new problems of general use. I'm just going to explain the start of this. So, to lengthen the back, for example, we can demonstrate using video to any pupil that there are a series of actions that have been conducted in a certain order, in a certain manner. And this leads to an unwanted result. We see that the person is really, in fact, creating conditions where it's very difficult to breathe, very difficult to move, very difficult to keep a functioning of the overall structure, and also very difficult to keep an open mind, to be open to ideas and to be capable of maintaining many ideas at the same time. Because when a series of actions have to be anticipated, well, it means that you must have these actions in mind. And also, when I say each of these actions is not the outcome of an individual process. For example, you may want to release the knee or to release the neck, or this is what is meant by the outcome an individual process. You must understand that all the parts work together to perform a general result. And it's not the sum of different actions of release that are ever going to improve the coordination. All the parts are moving at the same time. They are already guided by these appreciation, these sensory information that have been, in fact, theorized subconsciously because of the past experiences. And so it's necessary to understand where we are coming from, and then we want to have a strategic process, a whole strategic process made of decisions in interaction. The person is going to be asked to decide not one movement, not one tension, but a series of movements together. And each of these decisions and the action which results is what we call a tangible form, a concrete result of the strategy, the general strategy. I'm never asking a person to move the knee or to move the elbow or to widen the back. It's absolutely necessary that the pupil can start to understand a modular decomposition, that there are different parts and each of these parts has a trajectory possible. We want to test whether the person can influence the trajectories of different parts moving all at the same time. And so you must understand that this is a fantastic field of investigation. you don't need a laboratory. You don't need any expensive tool. You just need a simple camera, and you just need to refine your use of language. This is the basis of conscious guidance and control. This is the center of this idea that we can develop, each of us. Not a teacher that has developed a fantastic capacity of perceiving things. No, no, no. Each person can develop this very simple self-test, self-investigation. And I think that this is what really impressed John Dewey. Questions?
I think we should just leave it there this week, and then we will go into more detail with it next week. For people who would like to book a lesson with Jeando, you'll find a link underneath this video, and we will see you in the next video, and we'll talk more about self-experimentation in the conscious guidance and control work then. Thank you, Jeando.
You're welcome.